I've used this chart before. Today we're going to be starting with Buddhism, which constitutes about 500 million people in the world. Some of these numbers, you will have seen more updated numbers, but the reason I haven't changed these, this is the last set of comparative numbers that I saw. I have since seen different numbers for Buddhism. They talk about 1.2 million people, for Islam as well. But if I change just one of these numbers, then I'll be comparing apples to oranges. I'm waiting until I can get a full, revision. But all these numbers are a little higher now than what you see on the chart, but at least you have a comparative sense of them. About almost 500 million Buddhists. We will talk about Jainism. There's only about 4 to 5 million Jains, and we'll talk about Sikhism, which is about 28 million people. So we'll get into all of those as we go along. Again, you remember the box was the phenomena called the axial age, in which over only about 100-year period, we had the beginning, particularly in Asia, of Buddhism, of the Chinese traditional religions, Taoism, Confucianism, and by the way, if you're interested in those, I have the World Religion series on our website that you can watch the other religions as well, including the Chinese traditional religions. Shinto, which is the national religion of Japan, Jainism, all of those occurred within about 100 years of one another. They began about 100 years from one another. Now, I mentioned before, it's difficult to say when did a religion begin. Is it when we have an indication of their earliest oral tradition, because almost all of the ancient religions began with an oral tradition? Is it when they first wrote down their holy beliefs in some sort of scripture, a text that they hold as important? Or is it when they got organized in terms of having some sort of priesthood or official leadership? We've mentioned that Hinduism, the earliest dates go back 4,000 to 2,500 BC, meaning that's when the early writings began, or early oral traditions began, the earliest of the writing. In terms of an organized religion, they sometimes talk about 800 BC. I prefer the earlier number because I think Hinduism existed before it was more formally constituted. Actually, Hinduism existed before the early to middle Vedic periods, and the Vedic periods is when they actually wrote the stuff down that then fed into Hinduism. Off of this, you get Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism are all offshoots, more or less, to Hinduism. Sikhism is a middle way between Hinduism and Islam, and we'll talk about that when we get to Sikhism. But this sort of gives you an idea of the relationship, and again, these all began in India. Technically, Buddhism, the Buddha was born in a city that was in Nepal at the time, but they didn't have those national borders at that time. There are 4 holy or sacred sites in Buddhism. One, the place where the Buddha was born, which is in current-day Nepal, the place where he came to the realization of a middle way, the place where he was enlightened, and then the place of his death. Those are the 4 places of pilgrimage within Buddhism. Let's talk about Buddhism. Unlike Hinduism, Buddhism has a very clear founder and a historical figure that is the one who began the belief. He is the Siddhartha Gautama, was his name. He became known as the Buddha. This seems kind of quiet. Can you hear me in the back? Are we doing okay? Okay, good. The Buddha means the enlightened one, or more appropriately, probably the awakened one. I frequently give multiple definitions because it's always difficult to get the subtlety of meaning when you translate from one language to another. At one point in his life, someone asked the Buddha, who are you? And he said, I'm the one who is awake. And that's what he saw as the occurrence to him and the thing that he began to teach. There are a number of major traditions. I'll get into that in a minute. First, let me tell you the story of the Buddha. Sometime between the 6th and 4th century, we believe probably 560 to 490 BC, so we're talking 2,500 plus years ago, this young man, Siddhartha Gautama, was born. He was a prince. His father was a minor king. They used to have a lot of kings in an area of what is now Nepal, as I said. And early in his life, there are various stories that when he was, later on they came up with stories that he came out of his mother's side, that he immediately walked 7 steps, pretty amazing for somebody who just came out of his mother, and then turned around and spoke, even more amazing probably. But those accrual of things happened much later. In terms of historically, we believe that the understanding is he was born as a prince. Early on in his life, there was a seer, a sort of prophet who came along and told his father that his son, Siddhartha Gautama, was either going to be a great king or he was going to be a great holy man. Well, his father, wanted him to be a king. He wanted him to take over the family business and be king of the realm when he got older. And so for the first 29 years of his life, the one who would later become the Buddha was kept in the palace. And his father gave him every possible pleasure, every possible experience that was positive. He wanted him to see only beauty, only good. And finally, when he was 29 years old, and the stories differ whether he sneaked out of the palace or whether his father let him out for a while, he gets out into the world, and for the first time, he sees a number of things that were not consistent with what he'd experienced before. The first thing that he saw, these are the four sights. The first one was an old man, gray hair with a cane bent over, and he'd never seen anything like that. In fact, he asked his chariot driver, said, "What's wrong with him? What's wrong with that man?" And the chariot driver said, "We all get there. Eventually, all of us will experience, if we live long enough, old age and the decrepitude that comes with that." Most of us understand that by now. The second vision that he had, or sight that he had, was of a man who was sick. The third sight that he had was of a dead body. And in each case, he was startled by the realization that such suffering and eventually death and decay happen to all people. And he was really disturbed by this. And then the fourth vision he had was of a holy man, a renunciate, who seemed not to have any cares or any worries, but seemed to be able to accept his lot in life and be happy with it. Well, the story is, the Buddha came back to the palace, and after much thought, he decided that he needed to address the issue of suffering that existed in the world and to figure this out. So he left what's called the Great Renunciation. He left everything behind, all of his wealth. He left his father, his palace, everything behind, and went into the forest where there were other of these holy men that lived who were renunciates, meaning somebody who's renounced all things of the world. And he began to pursue truth. He began first learning from the holy men about meditation. And he was actively involved in meditation. He would go into a trance-like meditation, which was fine when he was meditating, but then when he came out of the trance-like meditation, he realized he was back where he started. And he eventually decided that didn't get it. That didn't cut it. That didn't give him either an understanding or a way to rise above all of the suffering that he saw around him. Then he started a second approach, which was the approach of extreme asceticism, meaning a complete denial of self. He was not eating, he was not sleeping, he was denying himself. In fact, he almost starved to death. There are, if you've ever seen any of the emaciated Buddhas, they have images of him just, you can see all of the bones, and he almost died. At the point of death, he realized, I haven't really gained anything here either. And so a young woman from the local village at that point, he allowed her to feed him. He regained his strength, and he finally decided the way to truth cannot be an extreme asceticism. I tried it and it didn't work. It also cannot be an extreme self-indulgence, because I experienced that before I left the palace, and that didn't work. There must be a middle way, some middle understanding that's not asceticism, it's not self-indulgence, that will give me an understanding of what's going on in the world. So he traveled around, he learned a great deal, and after deciding on the middle way, he, at age 35, after he had learned as much as he could from as many holy men as he could, he sat down beneath a ficus tree, a particular kind of ficus. It's since become known as the Bodhi tree. Bodhi is the same root as Buddha. It means to be enlightened. He sat down beneath the Bodhi tree, and he decided he was not going to move from that spot until he achieved enlightenment. And we're told that at that point, after a long period of time, during which he was tempted, Mara, which is the spirit of the world, was tempting him with wealth, was tempting him with his beautiful daughters in terms of lust and everything else, and the Buddha overcame all of that. And after a long period of time sitting under the Bodhi tree, he came to the sense of enlightenment that were the four noble truths of of Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, and I will, let me tell you about this first. There are a number of major traditions. Theravada tradition is the way of the elders. It's considered the most true to the original approach that the Buddha had. But one of the problems they had is in India, they already had, because of the Hindu religion, they already had a very strong sense of what it meant, samsara, the reincarnation, transmigration of the soul. They understood trying to overcome that in some way, to overcome the karma, to achieve moksha, the release from samsara. All of that was part of their belief system. Well, the Buddha really worked on those same principles. That's the understanding that Buddhism came out of Hinduism. Later on, when Buddhism started moving further east, it got into cultures that did not have such a strong sense of reincarnation or nirvana, or of samsara. And also that the idea of, okay, your whole goal in this thing is nothingness, is to not exist anymore. That's the prize at the end of all of this. Didn't appeal to a lot of the other cultures they were moving into in China and elsewhere. And so they developed another school called Mahayana. Mahayana means the large vehicle. And it's large vehicle because the intention there is to give, not just for me, which is sort of the Theravada, the original Buddhism, just for me to find enlightenment, but rather for me to find ways to give everybody else enlightenment. We'll talk about bodhisattvas in a minute. Any Steely Dan fans in the group? You know bodhisattva? Bodhisattva is a Mahayana Buddhism term. They have a song, Bodhisattva. Okay. We also have other kinds of Buddhism that developed. Zen, or Chang as it's called in China, or Zon in Korea. There is Pure Land Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, which is part of what may be considered a third school. The Vajrayana is Tibetan Buddhism. So a lot of these other Buddhisms developed, and as I say, particularly because adaptations were needed in order to make it fit in the culture, because not all of the Indian cultural expectations that had been the source of Theravada Buddhism made sense in these other cultures. Today, Thailand, China, Burma, Japan, East Asia, it really is global. Again, 500 million people around the world. But India, there's beginning to be an increase in India in Buddhist converts, but it's been slow coming, and it was almost extinct in India for a long, long time. Okay. Buddha, when he was under the Bodhi tree, he came to the realization of the Four Noble Truths. The first one is, and this is how he came to understand the experiences of the four sights, of being aged and decrepit, being sick, dying, and then the holy men who were able to sort of get past that. But the first one is the truth of dukkha. That is that all life is suffering. Now, this sounds more negative than it's intended, and suffering is dukkha doesn't carry the kind of negative connotation we hear in suffering. It can be all of life is anxiety, all of life is unease, all of life is unsatisfactory. It basically means nothing seems to satisfy. Nothing in this world seems to quite meet our expectations. And it's true. I mean, as a theologian, somebody who teaches this stuff, virtually every religion that has ever, or every culture that has ever existed in history has had some sense of religion, some kind of religion, and it has had some sense that there's something wrong with us. That, this is why, people, why they take drugs, why they drink too much, why they try to gain power, why they are abusive to others in order to gain power, why they want to be rich, why they want to get their fifth car, why they want to be the CEO of the organization. There's always this sense in which there's an itch that can't be scratched, and we're trying to find ways to scratch it. I think all of us are aware of that in society. Well, this is the idea of dukkha, that life is unsatisfactory and that we struggle with some way to try to make it satisfactory. Particularly, dukkha is expressed in one, physical suffering, second, trying to hold on to some reality when in fact reality is impermanent. One of the things that the Buddha articulated is that everything changes, that reality does not stay static long enough for you to grab it. It's like trying to squeeze water. You cannot really grab a hold of the things in this world because they're all changing. They are aging, They are dying. Trees grow, trees die, leaves fall, pets die. Everything is moving toward impermanence, and because of that change, our efforts to try to latch onto something that we can get satisfaction out of are going to be frustrated, inevitably. And also, the idea that the very sense that something in the physical reality is going to satisfy that hunger, that unsatisfactoriness that we have, is part of the problem as well. That desire to find something that satisfies leaves us it leads us to the point of samsara, where we're continually being reborn in order to try to get it right next time, and then get it right next time. Karma, the idea of cause and effect, is also part of Buddhism, that if you manifest negative things in your life, then you will have more trouble, either in this life or later on, or if you do well, then you'll have less problem. But there is karma. And the idea in Buddhism, similar to Hinduism, is nirvana. They use the word moksha more in Hinduism. Nirvana, the idea that eventually, if you really achieve satisfaction, get past all that, you don't have to come back, because you're no longer trying to struggle to gain possession of something that's not possible. So the existence of dukkha is number one in the Four Noble Truths. The second truth is the origin of dukkha. It is, as I was saying, the craving and clinging to pleasure and the aversion to what is not pleasurable that causes the suffering. We keep thinking that there's something out there that will give us satisfaction or pleasure, and we're craving it and clinging on it, and that's part of the problem. Some people, by the way, have said that this is kind of a medical formula, where you identify that there's a disease, you identify the cause of the disease, you then identify what the treatment needs to be, and then you provide the prescription. The third of these, identifying the treatment for the disease, is that we need to find a way to end the cessation, in other words, of dukkha. Putting an end to our craving, putting an end to our clinging, so that we no longer will have that suffering. We won't need to be reborn as we continue to try to grab hold of something in this world that will give us satisfaction. And so we no longer have to go through samsara, the birth, life of suffering, death, and then rebirth. And then fourth, what are you going to do about it? What's the prescription? The truth of the path of liberation from dukkha is to follow what was articulated by the Buddha as the Noble Eightfold Path. And in fact, one of the primary symbols of Buddhism, which is here, and it's represented in different ways, but it's the eight-spoked wheel. Those eight-spoked wheel represents the eightfold path that the Buddha advocated. The Eightfold Path, Noble Eightfold Path, or the middle way. This is how you get out of all of this, according to the Buddha. You have to have first a right view. You have to see things clearly. And primarily that means you have to recognize what your problem is, and that is dukkha. That you are dissatisfied, you experience suffering, and it's because of the craving that you have. Second, you have to have right intention. You have to focus yourself to have the right kind of thoughts, the right kind of aspirations. Don't let yourself slop over into the negativism and the wrong direction. Third, right speech. No falsehood, no abuse, no chatter, no meaningless talk. This is consistent with the fact in Hinduism, you'll remember, words have power. And psychologists will tell you that if you're lying in bed at night replaying the tapes, right? I know I'm not the only one. And, replaying, well, what I should have said was, that kind of thing. Well, that's the idea that you are allowing speech, the words that you use or that you allow others to use on you, to affect you. Then right action, that you do moral action, you cause no harm. Then right livelihood, what you do for a living, what you do to earn your income. That you don't work with weapons, you don't do anything that's degrading, you don't work with meat, because there's a strong vegetarian movement in this, as there is in Hinduism. You don't deal with intoxicants or poisons. What you do to earn your living makes a difference. Then right effort, to be disciplined in your thought, word, and deed. Right mindfulness, pay attention. That's one of my big deals. My wife is sitting there grinning because, not paying attention is the cause of almost all human suffering. I've been saying that a long time before I studied Buddhism. That if we just paid attention, we'd be more sensitive to one another's needs. We would be, everything would change for us. But most people don't pay attention. So paying attention, being mindful, being alert to the things that affect us. And then finally, right concentration, meditation on the right things. This is the Noble Eightfold Path. That is the prescription that Buddha offered for how we get out of suffering, of the various kinds that suffering is in the world. Now, the Buddha said that there were 3 marks of existence. Impermanence, back to that idea that everything changes, nothing is going to stay the same, so you can't really grab hold of it. It will squeeze out of your arms no matter how hard you try. Secondly, the existence of suffering that nothing will satisfy. And third, the idea of non-self. Non-self is one that a lot of people struggle with because it's hard for us in the rational world to wrap our heads around it. What it means is that as long as you're thinking in terms of I want this, I need this, I crave that, then you're inherently on the wrong track. That the goal is to remove yourself from the equation so that you can look at things more objectively. The tendency, especially in the West, is to be so subjective that we lack the ability to sort of remove ourselves from the situation, to be outside and to be able to pay attention to these things. To be able to have the right mindfulness, the right concentration, requires that we sort of step out of it and not be driven by our appetites, but rather be able to think about this in a meditative way, in a way that we're paying attention to it, in order to be able to change it. So the idea that, believe it or not, you are not the center of the universe, nor am I. To realize that we are sucked into this, but that we need to be prepared to step out of it in order to be able to gain anything. So, the existence of suffering and how you get out of suffering, and ultimately, to get out of suffering to the extent that you no longer have to repeat the birth, suffering in life, death, and then rebirth, is really the core of Buddhism. Now, one of the things about Buddhism is that it is non-theistic. The Buddhist system per se does not, none of the Buddhist groups advocate a belief in a creator God. They say if you want to believe in God, that's fine, but that doesn't have anything to do with this. For that reason, it's not, these days, it's fairly common for people to talk about being a Buddhist Christian or some other combination of a religious belief from which you get your sense of who God is and worship of God, but then to apply the disciplines, which really are what Buddhism is, to recognize the problem in the world as being suffering, which is a craving for, a desire for, a grasping for, which causes all of the suffering, and then to follow a particular discipline of thought and lifestyle and action which will allow you to get out of that. It's very consistent. In fact, as a Christian and a Christian minister, I would say that's very much a Christian doctrine. The idea that as long as you're focusing on yourself, you've got a problem. You know, if it's all about you, then in most of the religions you have a problem. Buddhism offers you a way to get away from that. And it is not in that regard, because it doesn't have any theistic direction, any theology that points toward God. It's not inconsistent with other religions, but rather is a philosophy of how you live your life. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to go on to the other 2 religions we're going to talk about today, and then we'll come back. So, well, no, let me do this. If you have questions about Buddhism right now, let me answer those, because we're going to go into Jainism next, okay? Questions about Buddhism? Yes?
Is it fair to believe that this was a teacher, or did he just lead by example? I mean, did he bring forth those concepts? Or
Right.
Where is it that, you could write about it like Jesus or like
Right.
Muhammad?
Yeah, so was he a historical figure, and did he write about this stuff, or did he just do it? He did not write, but his followers captured his writings. They captured them in Pali, which is a local language, intentionally not writing it in Sanskrit, which was holy, much more highfalutin, kind of a formal language. They wrote it in the local languages, and was captured not only from Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, the original Buddha, who is considered a historical character. They believe that he actually did live. And one of the things, a significant thing, is after he achieved enlightenment, after he figured out the Four Noble Truths and in the Eightfold Path and began to practice it, and really was awakened, as he said, he's one who is awake. Once he figured all this out and he had gotten past all of that craving and desire and things, and no longer was focused just on self, he decided intentionally that he wasn't just going to accept this for himself and go about his merry way and say, you know, I'm fine, the rest of you guys need to figure it out for yourself. Instead, he started teaching, and he drew followers around him, and he developed a group of followers, monastic followers. There are still Buddhist monks today. In fact, in a number of countries, this is true in Thailand and Bhutan, some others, that almost everyone as a young child will become a Buddhist monk. You've seen children with the shaved heads and the saffron robes kind of thing. Well, most of them don't stay a monk their whole life. They may be a monk for one rainy season, or a year, or a few years. And then they will, to learn Buddhism, and then they will leave that. So it's not like everybody, you know, becomes a Buddhist monk. But the monastic orders, immediately following Buddha and since, have continued to write the truths that they have learned and various disciplines. Again, Theravada Buddhism is probably the simplest. The Mahayana Buddhism, and I didn't even get into this and I meant to, Mahayana Buddhism focuses less on my finding enlightenment than on, and the reason that Mahayana means the large vehicle, because they want to include everybody in this, and they have the concept of the bodhisattvas. A bodhisattva is an individual, a human, who has reached the point of enlightenment, but when they get to the final stage, rather than step over into nirvana, where they don't have to come back anymore, they willingly choose to stick around in order to teach others these principles. So a bodhisattva is an enlightened creature, an enlightened human, who is at the point of Buddhahood, of complete awakening so that they no longer have to return, but they choose to stick around in order to be able to provide other people that teaching. In Mahayana and some of the others, like Pure Land Buddhism, which is under part of Mahayana, which is the prominent in Japan particularly, they have a particular, they believe there are many Buddhas that have come along, not just the Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. There were many Buddhas, many of these enlightened beings, and this is where it changes fairly significantly. Within Theravada Buddhism, there is no sense of worshiping or of having devotion to the Buddha. That's the school of the elders. So why do you have all these giant Buddha statues? Because when it changed and got into Mahayana, they needed more of a person to focus on. And so they began to believe that the Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, that he had had many incarnations, that he was something more than just an enlightened human, and that he therefore was deserving of devotion. And there are others that are deserving of devotion. I mentioned that some people weren't happy with the fact that the goal in all of this is just nothingness. And so they in Pure Land Buddhism, they identified one particular Buddha, a Maitreya, that they believe is going to welcome all of those who have had devotion to him in their enlightenment, and they will live in his kingdom with all of the blessings and, you know, all of the every imaginable pleasure and blessing that you can receive. Rather than just get into nothingness, you're going to have a good time of it forever and ever. So all of these sort of culturally began to develop in order to be able to give people answers. Back to your question, yes, we believe that Siddhartha Gautama actually lived. They wrote down his teachings. His followers then wrote down their teachings, and there's a huge collection, particularly in the language of Pali, it's been translated, of writings from the Buddhas as to how to gain this enlightenment. And then more in Mahayana and the other types of Buddhism that came along later. Over here first, you had your hand up? In the back, yeah. Okay, great. Back here?
Can we go back one slide? Just a point of clarification. Where it says, making and living pleasure and illusion of pleasure are the cause of suffering. So, if you were to pursue things that are non-pleasurable, then you would suffering, but doesn't that sound like a contradiction?
Well, the pursuit of anything, the pursuit of anything for its own sake, or because I want it. I mean, that's anybody who pursues something that they don't in some way find pleasurable, I don't know what to think of them. But, you know, even if it's skinning cats, I don't know. But the idea is that anything you are trying to seek for your own, because you want it, then whether somebody else would consider it pleasurable or not, still you are focusing on you, and you are focusing on something that you think is going to in some way give you satisfaction. I mean, why don't we all have $9,000 cars that will get us from point A to point B when we need to and then bring us back again, right? Why are there such things as $800,000 watches? My Timex does just fine, okay? We can find tens of thousands of examples where there are extravagances, not just basic things, but there are extravagances because we're trying to scratch some itch. And this is what Buddha was all about. We're finding somehow that life is not satisfactory, and so we're trying to find other experiences that will make it seem okay, that will salve the wound, that will, that get us past where we are right now so that we'll feel better about ourselves or our lives or whatever. All of that, 3,800 years afterwards, or 3,600 years afterwards, is exactly what the Buddha was talking about, or 2,600, sorry. We haven't changed. Human beings are the same everywhere. Yes?
On that note, Ross, I would agree with one of the last comments you made in your presentation, that is that Buddhism seems to be more of a philosophy than a religion.
Right.
On the premise that we're striving for material goods to better our lives, can you not take the contrary view that this is a necessary condition for the survival of our species?
So the question is that could we not say that the striving after things is necessary for survival, that it's a condition? Well, the striving after oxygen and water and food and basic shelter, yes. I mean, there are certain things. Remember, the Buddha's middle way said asceticism is not the answer. Denying yourself food. So that means that you have to make some arrangements for food. Buddhist monks, for instance, when they will, those who are seriously committed to it, they are given a robe and a bowl. And some other schools, they're also given a couple of other things, a filter and whatnot. But the idea of the bowl is that whatever they receive from people, and it's considered that people gain good karma by giving charitably to monks. When they give to Buddhist monks, they get a benefit. The monk is obligated to receive whatever they're given because otherwise they are denying good karma to people. But they receive that. And so there's an understanding there needs to be a process whereby you acquire the things you need for life, but that doesn't include $800,000 watches, okay, or even $10,000 watches. So let me get another question. I'll come back to you. Okay, back here.
How do you think Buddhist monks particularly justify the violence that we see in Sri Lanka and Myanmar?
Yeah, how do I think Buddhist monks particularly justify the violence we see? Most people in America, in my experience, believe that Buddhism is an entirely peaceful religion, even though it doesn't have a God focus. That is entirely, they're all calm, they're all Zen. We even use that expression, oh, he's really Zen, meaning he's really calm. Buddhism in parts of Southeast Asia has been very violent. There have been violent confrontations between Buddhists and Hindus, Buddhists and Christians. I would say probably not as much as some of the other major religions, but Buddhism has been very violent. I think any true practitioner of Buddhism would look at that the way any serious practitioner of Christianity would look at some of the horrible things that have been done in the name of Christianity in the past, or that an ordinary Muslim would look at some of the things happening in the Islamic world, in Islamism today. In every case, true adherents to these faiths would have a terrible time trying to understand, or certainly not justify, some of that violence. And there have been violences done in Southeast Asia in the name of Buddhism. But usually what that is, people say, well, religion is the cause of every war that's ever happened. No, it's not. As a historian, I would say that's simply not true. Looking online at the biggest wars ever, and you have to get down to like 10 or 11 to get any kind of religious connotation at all. My belief, my sincere belief, is that it is a desire for power and material possessions and land and everything else that drives people. It's greed. But the ultimate trump card to justify that greed is religion. Oh, well, I'm taking over this place and killing all the men in this new area because God told me to. Who can argue with that, right? But in fact, it's because I want their land, I want their goods, I want whatever it is. So I think that greed is the primary motivator, but we often in history, people have justified it according to a religion. Yes, Roger.
Good question. There are many books, famous sutra.
Sutras.
Buddhism, yeah, like Heart, King Kong, and so forth.
Right.
Where is their equivalent to like Bibles? Where do they come from?
Various writers, various leaders, teachers, gurus, or some of them would have claimed to be bodhisattvas even, Buddhas, in the past have written various writings, and some of them are called sutras. Their sutras tend to be poetic, they tend to be fairly short, almost aphorisms. The Lotus Sutra is the most popular one. The Heart Sutra is called the Heart Sutra because it's considered it's very brief. It addresses the heart of what Buddhism is supposed to be all about. So meditation on these sutras is considered one of the ways in which you can achieve the level of meditative calm that will lead you, to allow you to step outside yourself and lead to the point where you can overcome the craving and therefore get away from the dukkha. So the sutras have been written over 2,500 years by different people. The earliest ones were written as followers of Buddha himself. The original Buddha wrote them down. Okay, I'm going to take two more questions, then I got to get on to the others. Yes?
What is the origin and the role of the Dalai Lama in Buddhism?
Dalai Lama is Tibetan Buddhism, which is, some people believe that it's a subset of Mahayana. There's a third, some people say there's a third branch, the Vajrayana, and Tibetan Buddhism has some very different kinds of things. They focus a lot on what are called the Baros. It's believed that between various aspects of human existence, and that's between waking and sleeping, between non-pain and pain, and most especially between life and death, that there are middle places. And that if you come to an understanding of how to conduct yourself in those middle places, you will gain enlightenment that is more quickly and more in a more effective way. For instance, between waking and dreaming, there are in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. If you've heard of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's about this. And they will have when somebody is near the point of death, they will have a Tibetan monk reading from the Book of the Dead to them. It's sort of an instruction manual. How do you deal with the passage? But between waking and sleeping, they actually have developed what's called a lucid dreaming state, which means you are dreaming, but you're consciously aware of what you're dreaming at that time. And that's considered part of the ways, and Tibetan Buddhism is unique in some of those kinds of ways. Tibetan Buddhism is also unique in some of the artistic kind of pursuits they have. Have you ever seen any of the sand mandalas? A mandala is considered a sacred geometry that is circles and squares and things. And the most impressive of them are made out of colored sand. And they take days and weeks to create. And they'll have these little sort of straws and they'll be tapping out sand and they create these amazingly, well, the very process of creating those is unique to Tibetan Buddhism, is considered a major form of meditation. And then to meditate on the image of a mandala is considered an important kind of meditation as well. And then once they do all of that, and they create these astonishing things, some of them huge, they then sweep it all up. And they pour it in a river as a sign of the impermanence of all things. So but the artistry, the colorful aspect of that is fairly unique in all of Buddhism. So they have a particular, and they have their leader is the Dalai Lama, who's the 14th Dalai Lama. They believe in reincarnation. And so the current Dalai Lama is seen as the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama. And after the previous Dalai Lama died, there was a period of time, and then they went searching for the next Dalai Lama, who was the reincarnation of the previous one. They said that the 13th Dalai Lama, as he was lying on his bier, in state after he died, that he turned to the northeast. And so they knew to look to the northeast for the next Dalai Lama. They found a child who, they meditated about it. They decided on an area, a community, and they found a child in this village. And the first thing he did when he saw the other Dalai Lamas was he grabbed the beads from one of the other lamas, grabbed the beads from one of them and said, "Those are mine, why do you have them?" Well, those had been the beads of the 13th Dalai Lama. They then laid out a lot of the possessions of the previous Dalai Lama along with a lot of other things, and the child picked the ones that had belonged to the previous Dalai Lama, even though they were shinier and more fun-looking items. They finally determined he was the reincarnation, and he became the 14th Dalai Lama. Sorry for this. He is considered the embodiment of peace, of non-aggression, and therefore the leader of Tibetan Buddhism. He, of course, is in exile in India now because the Chinese have taken over. But, okay. I'm going to go on to... Oh, I had one more. I thought I'd get you.
I was just curious if there's a temple in Nepal where Buddha was born. Is there a place where pilgrims go?
There is. In fact, they began in terms of sites where he died. His remains... Oh, thank you very much. Very kind. Thanks. His remains were spread out amongst various places, and they were put in a structure, sort of a mound, called a stupa. And the stupas are in various locations, and they became a standard sort of model for Buddhist shrines after that. And in all four of the places where he was born, where he realized the need for the middle way, where he was enlightened, and where he died, there are currently shrines in all of those places. Okay? Okay, let's talk about Jainism. Jainism, again, we talk about 500 BC as being the official founding, but it's considered an ancient religion because, again, prior to that formal founding, there were writings and teachings that occurred. The founder is called Mahavira. He is the last of 24 Tirthankaras. Tirthankara is a spiritual teacher, but specifically translated, it means a ford builder. One who builds a ford to get you from one side to the other. And so the belief in Jainism is that there will be 24 of these ford builders, Tirthankaras, that come at each half-life of human history. If you know about half-lives, it's like half of what's remaining. And so at some point we're going to start piling up Tirthankaras really fast. Major traditions, the Shvetambaras and the Digambaras. You may see this as we travel because we're going to have the opportunity later on to see some Jain sites. The Digambaras are ascetics. They're called skyclad. That's what Digambara means. Skyclad because they don't wear any clothes. They are literally clad in the sky. Asceticism, the Jain religion is, in its monastic orders, is the most ascetic religion ever. In fact, within the Jain religion, it's not common, it's very rare, and it's not really encouraged, but it exists, that Jain monks will fast to death. They will deny themselves because they want to remove themselves from connection to the world. They will deny themselves food, and eventually they die. That's pretty serious asceticism right there. It's almost entirely in India. They have a number of sacred writings that were offered. The three main principles of Jainism are non-violence, non-absolutism, you have to be open to varying ideas, and then non-possessiveness. This symbol right here, which is a common symbol for Jainism, the word in there is ahimsa, which means non-violence. The Jain faith is more committed to non-violence than any other single principle. They actually have 5 vows, and the first one is ahimsa, non-violence. But the word Jain, by the way, comes from the word Jina, which means conqueror. These are the 5 vows of Jainism. The first one, and the most important one, the one that overcomes everything else, is ahimsa, non-violence or non-injury. And let me back up to that other image. If you see a Jain monk, well, these are skyclads, if you can see them down here, at the foot of one of the statues. They have these enormous statues of the Tirthankaras, they're teachers, that they show devotion to, and these guys are, buck naked. They're because they've renounced everything. Clothing, they have no home, they only eat what's given to them. But this is something you'll often see among Jain monks, and that is a face covering so that they don't inhale insects or even microbes to the point that they can help it, because that would involve killing those creatures, and they don't want to kill them. And they also will carry a small broom, which is made of soft thread, and they will, before they sit down anywhere, they will sweep with that broom, or before they walk, they will sweep in front of themselves, lest they either sit or walk on an insect. Within the Jain faith, they have a hierarchy of nonviolence, meaning the first priority is nonviolence against people. Nonviolence in action, nonviolence in speech, nonviolence in intent. Right below that, they have nonviolence to animals. The majority of Jains are lacto-vegetarians. And if they have any sense that animals are harmed or done any kind of violence while they're being milked, then they'll be vegans. They won't even drink milk. So this nonviolence, and then below that, humans, animals, then insects. To not create any violence to an insect. If a Jain finds an insect in their house, they will escort them out. Okay? We don't do that when we find insects in our houses usually, but they do. And then below that are plants. Serious Jains will not eat any tubers, any plant that's pulled up out of the ground, like a potato or an onion, because they both kill the plant when they do that, and it's believed they also will damage the other beings that live in the ground around it. So they will only eat, and again, there's some more strict and less strict, but most of them are pretty strict. They prefer to eat only fruits and vegetables that come from plants that in no way harm the plant when they're taken off, rather than do some damage to the plant. But beyond that, they will eat, like lettuce, something that you can take off and not kill the plant, but it's still considered a kind of violence, and so they're reluctant to do that. They are very serious about this, ahimsa. The second one is satya, the second vow, is a commitment to truth, to always speak the truth, and that means truth in what you say, truth in what you do, truth in how you act, not misleading anybody in any way. Third is astraya, which means not stealing. And they expand that to mean not dealing unfairly with anyone, not trying to get an unfair deal. It's also that you not take anything from anyone that's not willingly offered. When the Jain monks, they cannot ask for something. It has to be voluntarily offered to them, or they feel like they are violating the vow of asteya. The brahmacharya is chastity. It's celibacy for monks, and sexual union only with a married partner for those who are not monks. And the aparigraha is the last one, which is non-possessiveness, non-materialism, non-attachment. That you don't have a connection to something, that you value it inappropriately. Again, they may have a bowl, they may have something else. The most radical of the monks have nothing, quite literally nothing. No clothing, no home, no nothing. But all Jains are supposed to try to keep from possessiveness. And monks and serious renunciates, those who get later in their life and renounce the things of this life, their non-possessiveness includes not having attachment to objects, of places, and of people. They tend to leave their families, because even a possessiveness to a relationship is considered inappropriate at that point. So they are very serious about this kind of stuff. They believe that there are 4 wrong passions of the mind that you have to try to overcome. They are anger, pride, which they see as ego, to the greed and deceitfulness. Those 4, anger, pride, greed, and deceitfulness, they try to overcome. And they do that through what are called the 3 jewels. First is right view, that is believing in the substance of the soul and the non-soul without connection to the physical world. Second, right knowledge, knowing that the things that cause our problems. Third, right conduct, acting in a right way that is loving and generous. They believe the universe is eternal, and that, but they believe there is no creator God. Because the universe is eternal, no God created it. They believe the goal is to become one with God, the one true God, but that it's not a creator God in that regard. They think that the way to overcome that there's a process, like the Eightfold path in Buddhism, that there's a stepped process that you proceed with, that you attain liberation by first, you're a wrong believer. You got it all wrong. Secondly, you get a slight taste of right belief that motivates you. Third, you're mixed belief. You got some things right and some things wrong. Then you have true belief but no self-discipline. Then you're partly self-controlled. Number 6, you have complete self-discipline with some negligence. Number 7, you achieve complete self-control without negligence. Number 8, there's you still have passions. Number 9, meditation leads you to minimize passions. Number 10, rarely have passion. Number 11, all passion is suppressed. Number 12, passion is annihilated, but you're not yet omniscient. Then finally, you achieve omniscience yet with activity, and finally, omniscience with no activity. That's their version of nirvana. So Jainism is very serious about this stuff. Practices of Jainism. They fast regularly, especially during festivals. They meditate. It's called samayika, the goal of which is to achieve perfect calmness and an understanding of self and the shedding of one's passions, those attachment things. And then monasticism. Jainism encourages and values, honors monasticism more than any other religion. To become a monk and to renounce the world is considered the highest of all human existence. And as I say, they take that very seriously. Any questions about Jainism? I still have to talk about Sikhism. Okay, let's talk about the third today. Sikhism. Sikhism is quite new. It began right around 1499. The founder was called Guru Nanak. He was the first of 10 human gurus. And then there's an 11th guru who is a book, the Guru Granth Sahib. They live primarily in the Punjab, although there are Sikhs living in other parts of the world. Sikhs wear turbans. If you've never had a Sikh taxi driver, then you've never been in New York or Chicago or probably San Francisco, because they're known as being very hard workers. They believe it's a revealed religion that the founder, Guru Nanak, similar story to Buddha in some ways. He was a young man, well-to-do. He was very well thought of. People saw him as a very spiritual young man, although he was not real keen on the Hinduism that existed or the Muslim faith that was there present when he was a young man as well. At one point, he went away to bathe in a river and he disappeared. There are different versions of this. One of them is that he was elevated to the heavens and taught. The other was he just went away meditating for 3 days, and when he came back, he said, God is not Hindu, God is not Muslim. We must find our own reality in God. And so he did not follow Hinduism, he did not follow Islam. He began travels throughout all of India, starting from the northwestern part of India, the Punjab, and teaching. And he said, for instance, his perception of God is that there's one omnipotent God who is supreme, universal, all-powerful, and truthful, formless, fearless, without hate, the self-existent, incomprehensible, everlasting creator of all things, the eternal and absolute truth. He also advocated the equality of all human beings, which is critical in their belief, the idea of selfless service, and of true and honest living, primarily for the purpose of supporting your family. So Sikhs today, they're not into visiting shrines, although they have shrines in Amritsar, in the Punjab region of India, partly India, partly Pakistan now. But Amritsar, they have the Golden Shrine, which is where an example of service since the first guru in the end of the 15th century. They have been offering free meals at the Golden Temple in Amritsar to anyone who comes. In many places where the Jains are, part of their service is that they will have meals every day and feed vegetarian meals to anyone who comes. In the case of the Golden Temple, that's thousands and thousands of people every day. This is part of what they've been doing for 500 years. They believe absolutely in equality, that men and women are equal, people of all creeds, colors, states, and religions are all equal. Women have an equal stand in their religion to men. There is no separation made. There are women who lead prayer for in the Sikh services as well. In 1678, the last of the 10 human gurus came along, and I'll do this first. He said that there would be no more human gurus, this is in 1678, but that instead they would invest in their holy writing, which at that time was called the Adi Granth, that it would become their guru from that point on, and there would be no need for other human gurus. So the Guru Granth Sahib is a book, but it is considered a holy book. It is elevated. If you go to the Golden Temple, it is elevated on a platform. It's covered with beautiful silks. It's always higher than the people. It is constantly read. If you go to the Golden Temple, you can walk around the Golden Temple, and they will have reading of the Guru Granth Sahib, and then they will have the translations of it in English and Hindi and various other languages as you walk around, so that you can perceive that. They believe that the gurus are first human, and then the book, that they are the great teachers. Their values: absolute equality. All humans are equal before God. No discrimination. Personal right. Every person has a right to life, but this is restricted, and everyone has duties. A Sikh will rise early, meditate and pray. They will eat simple food. They will do an honest day's work. They have duties to their family, which are very important to them. They're expected to enjoy life. They're expected to be positive about life and to be charitable. Those are the duties. Actions count. Salvation is obtained by one's actions, good deeds, and remembrance of God. They focus, one of the kinds of prayer is to repeat the name of God. But they believe that unity with the one eternal oneness of God is the ultimate experience. That's what they're looking for when they talk about salvation. Living a family life, to provide and nurture for children, perpetual benefit of creation, to share, give to charity. Every Sikh is expected to give 10% of their net income. I sometimes have had people say, well, do I have to give from my net, or can I give from my gross? It's the wrong question. A Sikh would never ask that question, or can I give from my gross instead of my net? The idea of sharing, they give 10%. They also are very charitable personally, feeding people, welcoming visitors. As I say, they have what's called the landar, the lunch food, the food they provide for anyone who comes, to accept God's will, whether they be happy events or miserable events. I'm reminded of the book of Job, when Job's wife said, curse God and die. Job said, are we to give thanks to God for only the positive things and not for the negative things as well? Well, that's exactly a principle in Sikhism as well. And then the four truths of life. That truth, that is non-falsehood, contentment, they're expected to be happy with their life. Contemplation, and then nam. Nam means to focus on the name of God, and that may be just the repetition of the name of God, or there are various other writings about the name of God. Beliefs. There is one all-pervading spirit, whom they call God. The liberation of salvation comes as a spiritual union with the divine. The physical world is an illusion. You see how this comes out of Hinduism and Buddhism a little bit. The supreme purpose of a human life is reconnection with the divine. Singing of the glories of the Supreme One is the most effective form of divine communion. The Guru Granth Sahib is written in couplets, rhyming couplets, most of it. And there are other poems that are part of it as well. And many of them have been set to music. So singing and dancing is a very important part of the Sikh life. Remember the part about enjoying life? The remembrance of the divine name, or nam. Service and charitable action is required. Justice and equality are paramount, and respecting the authority of the 10 gurus in addition to the Guru Granth Sahib. There is within Sikhism a group called the Khalsa. All Sikhs are actually expected to be part of this. Not all are, because as a young person usually, you are baptized into this special order of Khalsa. And when you are baptized into this, and it's through a ritual washing, you are then, from that point on in your life, you are supposed to maintain on your person the 5 Ks, or kakars. They mean items. First, every Sikh that is serious about it goes with uncut hair. The men don't cut their beards, and this is one of the reasons for the turban, is the turban wraps the long hair. If you've ever seen a Sikh man without his turban on, his hair may be, since he was a young boy, in length, and they wrap it, and then wrap the turban with it. And it's an expectation that you must rewrap the turban twice a day. Second K, that's kesh, uncut hair. Second, the kanga, or a wooden comb. back in the time of the last human guru, apparently they were growing their hair, but the men were allowing them to get dirty and matted. And he said that won't work. And so he required that you comb your hair, men or women, twice a day, and that you carry a comb, small wooden comb, in your hair to remind you twice a day you were supposed to keep your hair clean and combed. Third, they have the kara, which is a metal bracelet made out of iron or steel. It is supposed to be a reminder that what you do with your hands is important, a reminder that God is the eternal and unbroken one, and the discipline that they're called to. Fourth, the kachera, which is a specific style of cotton undergarment. And this is men and women, will wear these cotton undergarments. It has a drawstring. It's intended, and men sometimes, if they go to a beach or something, they will go just in their kachera because it's sufficient to cover everything. But it's a loose garment, and unlike some other kinds of undergarments from the old days, it's something that you can run in and you can fight in. The old garments that they used to wear were not practical for that, and they need to be prepared to do battle at any moment in defense of the faith. And then the fifth thing related to that is the kirpan, which is a curved sword. Usually it's a dagger about 6 or 8 inches long, and they're expected to carry it to defend the weak and those who are being attacked, to defend the faith if necessary. The Sikhs have always been known as very, very efficient and powerful soldiers. They have been very powerful in the British Army when they worked for them. You've seen pictures of the British soldiers with turbans. Those were Sikhs. They are very willing to go to war when necessary. They don't believe in it. They say that first it should be peace. But if no word of peace is sufficient, then the flash of the sword is necessary. In fact, the symbol of Sikhism is a 2-edged sword with a circle around it and then 2 curved blades on either side of that. They are peaceful people, but they are ready to fight if they need to, and they believe that that is sometimes necessary. So the kirpan, obviously you're not allowed to carry a 9-inch blade on an airplane. So they sometimes will wear a pin that has the image of the kirpan on it, or even, the little plastic daggers, swords that you get in mixed drinks. Sometimes, if they're going somewhere they're not allowed to carry a real blade, they'll carry one of those as a symbol of the kirpan that they carry on themselves. That's Sikhism. Any questions about Jainism, Sikhism, or even the other? Yes?
You mentioned that they have equality between men and women. All of the others you've discussed, where do women fit in?
So, where do women fit in the other religions besides Sikhism? In Sikhism, there is absolute equality. In most of the others, women are not given that level of equality at all, and it varies from one to the other. In Hinduism, women are given quite a bit of recognition and authority, partly because there are female goddesses, and that there are consorts, even in the male gods, Vishnu and Shiva and other major male gods, they have consorts, women gods that are their mates. And you have Lakshmi, some of the other minor gods that are very much favorites. Lakshmi is the female god of beauty. It means luck. One of the guides yesterday was named Lakshmi. That's from one of the goddesses. And so they have pretty good representation there. Within Jainism, they're fairly equal as well. Jain women can become monks as well as Jain men. So they can achieve the highest level. And oftentimes, what's formally believed and what is practiced socially between people is not always the same. Sometimes even religions that say that they are completely equal will still have social differences. Sikhism is absolutely equal. There are women are in positions of authority at every level. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, can you say a few words about the Parsis?
Okay, I talked about the Parsis yesterday, or day before yesterday. Zoroastrianism, yesterday, if you were on the spiritual legacy, we were not allowed to go in because if you're not Parsi is the Hindi word for Persian. And so Zoroastrians, when they came from Persia because of persecution or oppression, suppression, by the Islamic people that invaded Persia, the majority of them moved to India. They believe it's considered monotheistic, although I tend to think it's dualistic. Their primary god is Ahura Mazda, which means the Lord of Wisdom. The opposing force, which is kind of the devil to them, is Ahriman, and those two have been in conflict since the beginning of existence, and eventually they believe that Ahura Mazda will overcome Ahriman. The symbols, they believe, they focus on the original symbols of earth, air, water, and fire. Water and fire is their primary focus. Every temple, Parsi temple, will have examples of water, fountains or pools, and fire. It's called the fire temple because they have a central fire which represents enlightenment and represents life and all of those things. And they are particularly known by the fact that when purity is very important to them. Ritual washing, dead bodies are put on tops of what's called towers of silence and allowed to be eaten by the birds because to bury a body is impure. Okay, I've gone way over. Thank you all very much. I'll see you this afternoon.